How's it going? Since you're watching in the future, I'll just assume you said okay at best. I mean, am I right? All the leaders and the media that's supposed to keep the leaders in check are full of it, and we know it. My name's Ryan, and you're watching Logical Breakdown. Today, we're going to look at how full of it they are by showing you their biases and how they exploit ours. This video will be part one in a series on bias in the media and politics. In this video, I'll talk about conscious or explicit bias and unconscious or implicit bias and how they affect the information we receive. I'll explain how being a for-profit corporation creates explicit bias by looking into what influences them. I'm also going to talk about how that bias causes them to try to manipulate you through our own implicit biases. So, let's get into it. First of all, a conscious bias and an explicit bias are the same thing, and an unconscious bias and implicit bias are the same thing. We all know what conscious and unconscious means, but explicit and implicit could use a little clarification. We'll start with explicit. Explicit, fully revealed or expressed without vagueness, implication, or ambiguity, leaving no question as to meaning or intent. Fully developed or formulated, unambiguous in expression. Therefore, conscious or explicit bias is a clear, understood bias that we are aware of. This describes biases such as what political party you align with the most, what sports team you root for, being pro or anti anything, really, and of course, good old American racism. When it comes to media and politicians, it's obviously referring to the political party being backed, but also who owns or advertises on the media, who donates to who, what the audience wants to hear. All of these things are understood by the biased person or entity. You can get a good understanding of a particular media outlet or politician's bias by adhering to the advice, follow the money. We all know that money is power, and if there's a lot of it even implying what narrative to circulate, then it'll probably get circulated. We can see which individuals and corporations are donating to which politicians and political organizations on a site called opensecrets.org. All you have to do to find out who funds the news media is to watch their commercials. A channel that has health industry ads wouldn't likely advocate for universal health care, as just one example of why their advertisers matter. Just the fact that these companies are for profit at all is a problem for objectivity. If the goal is to keep eyes glued to the ads, then the most attention-grabbing stories will be covered more. In the effort to keep people watching, the message tends to be tailored to the audience, whether they're woke or bigots. There's also the issue of the profit motive of the capitalist system itself. Why would a politician or news outlet question a system that keeps them in power? Now that we have a basic understanding of conscious or explicit bias and how they affect political narratives, it's time to learn about unconscious or implicit biases and how they are used against us to convince us of those narratives. Implicit, capable of being understood from something else, though unexpressed. Implied. Present, but not consciously held or recognized. Not lessened by doubt. Absolute, complete. Involved in the nature or essence of something, though not revealed, expressed, or developed. Potential. So, unconscious or implicit bias is something that's more internal, something we kind of develop over the course of our lives and is shaped by our experiences and worldview. For example, if you were born into wealth and never really faced adversity, it's understandable that you might assume people who struggle just aren't trying hard enough. But conversely, if you were born poor and had to work multiple jobs to get by, and your degree you worked hard for got you nothing but debt and useless knowledge, then it's understandable that you might assume that a successful person got where they are because of privilege. The reality is that some poor are lazy, and Some bust their asses to get nowhere. Some rich people work hard to get where they are. But some fail upwards, hence terms like fail son. We have to look at data and statistics to determine which is true. The most of us believe what feels right based upon our gut. Those are biases. Cognitive biases are implicit biases that affect our judgment. Let's go to yourbias.is to take a look at the list of these biases. I'm just going to read through these real fast because all I'm trying to do is to get you to recognize some of your own biases and think about how they might affect what you believe. Anchoring. The first thing you judge influences your judgment of all that follows. The sunk cost fallacy. You irrationally cling to things that have already cost you something. The availability heuristic. Your judgments are influenced by what springs most easily to mind. The curse of knowledge. Once you understand something, you presume it to be obvious to everyone. Confirmation bias. You favor things that confirm your existing beliefs. The Dunning-Kruger effect. The more you know, the less confident you're likely to be. Belief bias. If a conclusion supports your existing beliefs, you'll rationalize anything that supports it. Self-serving bias. You believe your failures are due to external factors, yet you're responsible for your successes. The backfire effect. When some aspect of your core beliefs is challenged, it can cause you to believe even more strongly. The Barnum effect. You see personal specifics in vague statements by filling in the gaps. Groupthink. You let the social dynamics of a group situation override the best outcomes. Negativity bias. You allow negative things to disproportionately influence your thinking. Declinism or declinism. You remember the past as better than it was and expect the future to be worse than it will likely be. The framing effect. You allow yourself to be unduly influenced by context and delivery. Fundamental attribution error. You judge others in their character, but yourself on the situation. The halo effect. How much you like someone or how attractive they are influences your other judgments of them. Optimism bias. You overestimate the likelihood of positive outcomes. Pessimism bias. You overestimate the likelihood of negative outcomes. Just world hypothesis. Your preference for justice makes you presume it exists. In-group bias. You unfairly favor those who belong to your group. The placebo effect. If you believe you're taking medicine, it can sometimes work, even if it's fake. The bystander effect. You presume someone else is going to do something in an emergency situation. Reactance. You'd rather do the opposite of what someone is trying to make you do. The spotlight effect. You overestimate how much people notice how you look and act. We all have some of these biases in one degree or another. These biases can be used against us, like when something is repeated over and over in order for it to stick in our heads. So that's the first thing that pops in our head when the subject comes up, utilizing the availability heuristic. We can end up thinking it's true because it's what you heard all over the place, and it must be if all those people keep saying it. Anchors and politicians tend to be at least somewhat attractive and charismatic, and that's got a lot to do with the halo effect. I'll get more in depth with each of these biases later in the series, but for now I hope you have a better understanding of what a cognitive bias is. As I've said, cognitive biases are just one kind of implicit bias. There's also, of course, your worldview and belief system. If you're a man, you're more susceptible to believing a misogynist statement, and if you're a woman, you're more susceptible to believe man-bashing statements. If you were raised in America, you probably were taught to believe that communism is evil. If you were raised in Cuba, it's likely you were brought up believing capitalism is evil. I'm not saying that these traits automatically make you believe things, just that you're more likely to believe them or give them less scrutiny. Cognitive biases obviously complement these implicit biases. Both of the examples I just gave are subject to confirmation bias and belief bias. I will go more in depth on the individual biases over the course of this series. But for now, I hope you just have a better understanding on the difference between explicit and implicit biases, what cognitive biases are, and how they can shape our views and beliefs. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.